Hello, good morning everyone. Welcome to Navaja Negra. There is nothing like arriving and that Miguel from Telenero arrives. It is fantastic. We are going to have this talk that is brief. Most of you are waiting to see what happens now we explain why this talk is called the name change that we have done, and the second is the security check. What is this of the continuous validation of security controls? First of all, thank you to Navaja Negra for this magnificent event and for being part of it. We are delighted. We have brought almost the entire team, so you will get to know each other there. Well, going back to the title for a moment. The idea of the talk is to deal with both aspects. But I want to emphasize the continuous validation of security controls. Stay with the term Security Control Validation or SCV. Who am I? Well, most of you know me. I am Abraham Pasamar. I am an engineer. I have a technical training and I started with the forensic, looking around the hard drives classes for electronic evidence, pericial in trial, etc. And then we have been evolving. Now you will see it when I talk about the company, because that's how it looks a little more graphically. I am the founder of Inside, which is a company that I founded in 2005 and now, as you can see, since this week, after a fusion process with another company, we have done a rebranding and we have changed our brand and some concepts. Well, this is a bit me and this is what I want you to look at in this evolution. We started as electronic expert. Then we started making incidents. In response to incidents of all types. In 2012, there were already first attacks on a large scale, and that's where we started with the forensic adaptation to this. Then we incorporated the auditors. In a classic way. The PENTS, the red team exercises, etc. And then managed services, and now, to talk about this last name, we have these last two columns. In 2023, we joined a company called Compute, a company from the Netherlands, which also dedicates itself to cybersecurity, and we gathered forces. We began to unite our teams, and now that everything is well united, well consolidated, because they are processes that take their time. We have launched this new brand, Defian, which is the name we want to be known with now. We haven't done it because the issue of incidents was very similar. This problem, I founded it in 2005 and we have had that problem since 2014. But now we have decided to use this new brand and this new typology, which is Defian. Well, Defian is this new concept that we have created, uniting two existing companies with a long career in cybersecurity, and basically nothing has changed. We continue to be a company with an important technical approach, but we highlight two things now. On the one hand, a more united portfolio, more extensive, more complete. On the other hand, the active defense concept, in which we want to give it a little more. Or we believe our vision is that there is a lack of certain strategic advice and maintaining all the services. We want to go a little more to the technical part that we have. We want to go a little more to make that message understood in the executive area. In the C-level area, we want that to be understood. And on the other hand, this active defense concept. What we also want is to use the technical part, from the part that we have also enhanced from Research Lab. We have a research laboratory that we want to enhance more and more to be able to enter into certain topics a little more advanced. What are we going to tell you today to present Defian? Well, I raise this question. Everyone invests in cybersecurity. More and more is being invested because everyone sees the beards of the neighbor Moja. But it works for us. And to this question, everyone usually does the classic actions of making auditors, trying to measure in one way or another. Let's go over this a little bit and why this concept of continuous validation of security controls can be very effective. What is the context? Well, as I say, there is more and more investment. There is more and more technology. There are more things that we have to take into account. More capable of protecting, and in what way. And obviously, they are difficult decisions for those who have to make up a team, make up a security scheme, make up a monitoring strategy, response by layers. But what we continue to see is that there are still, despite all those tests, despite all that technology, many successful attacks. And why is this happening? Perhaps in the auditors, in the PNTs, in the red team that we are doing. We are focusing on some things and we are not evaluating in a more holistic way, more seeing the whole set. And this, what is the traditional approach? This way of measuring, this way of seeing how our measures are valid, how they are usually done. How is it usually done? Well, it is usually done with the auditors. There are many types of auditors, but many of the auditors, what people know by auditors, have a clear approach of normative compliance, and if I have put the check, I already have and the audit has passed. So, well, many obviously have a reach problem or are limited. The PNTs are very important. We do a lot. I am not going to say that they are not, but many times the approach is, well, I go to the specific technical vulnerabilities. I try to detect them. I try to look for that, and if I find it, I am communicating that here there is something to remedy. Sometimes difficult remediation if we are only looking at that vulnerability. But what I mean is that they are directed towards certain specific components of our security system. And the red team is very important. If one already has within their company monitoring, response, a team, people who can respond to certain types of attacks, it is perfect from time to time. Not only to see the technology and to see how the configurations are, but also to see how the team reacts, etc. Everyone understands that a red team is a very good thing to do. But of course, the red team can sometimes find a point, a gap, and be super successful, and they have gone only through that gap. It is also specific at that point, and you have to be lucky that that point is seen in that red team. It can be repaired and that part will be covered, but it still has a specific focus. Although many times from a red team you can get many things at a global level, but a little so that you have the photo. What are the limitations? Well, the audit does not measure the real security in a very effective way. The security system against attacks, the Pentex, as we have said, is a good technical photograph and with zoom, but apart from that it is outdated. This is important to take into account because that must be repeated later. Well, I already made a big Pentex of the internet a while ago and that evolves. That changes. That suffers modifications. And the red team has a specific response. It will be applied depending on the genius of the attackers. Well, X techniques and they can find more or less things. But they are going to operate as a certain type of attack. It also has a high cost. So its repeatability cannot be allowed in a constant way. Well, then, we have things, but we do not have something that really gives us something recurrent. What is security control validation? What is SCV? Well, it is recurrence. Precisely. That is, it is to look, measure and try to cover the maximum number of TTPs. Now we will see, of tactics, techniques and adversarial procedures. In a recurrent way, especially in our security infrastructure, facing attacks, concrete attacks, real attacks, the ones that we are really going to suffer. What is most likely, starting with the most probable, of what is going to happen to us. For example, today it would be common to reproduce the TTPs of a ransomware group. For example, or something similar, that is, filters, etc. What else? Well, for this there are the BAS tools. The BAS tools, which abridge an attack simulation, are tools that are prepared, or you can develop them, to be able to launch multiple techniques, tactics that adversaries use, in a recurrent way, well parameterized, that you can customize to your liking, that there is a specific technique and you find several variants and you develop them and they are part of all that set of TTPs that you are going to have there in a tool of this style. And the best of all is that in SCV what is used? Meter is used. Most of you know, but the framework of meter, the adversarial tactics, techniques and common knowledge, is something fantastic. Because first of all, it is something made for the community. It is open. You can use it. It is not created by any specific company. But Meta has given it to the world. And why have they done it? Well, because of the mess that was there. That is, there is a mess of language, of names, of understanding, of what a tactic, a technique means, how an adversary behaves. The other, so what have they been looking for? A common language. And if the common language allows us to talk about the same thing, then if we have a common language and a common framework that collects all that knowledge of all, those TTPs, we use it, and it also helps because it is done in a way that we see the evolution of an attacker from the moment an objective is set until it is finalized. It does not always apply everything in a certain attack, but we have a matrix that gives us a lot of information. For those who do not know it, it is something like that. It looks very ugly like that in white, but now we will paint it. We have different columns that tell us about the evolution of that attack. This is because I point out here, because it is very important that we always have a reference frame so that our results are mapped. There, and we can see the evolution. Examples of what can be done with that CW. Well, recognition of a typical attack. An attacker arrives, has control of an endpoint and says, well, I'm going to pass a bloodhound or something similar to see if I recognize the environment. This is detected by LDR. Some alert pops up in the CM. Something happens. The idea is that many like these. The greatest number possible. That we do not swallow. But that they are many and increasingly complete to test them in a sequential way. So that access to credentials is because the bloodhound has the lateral movement bypass of hash or whatever. It detects it from us. Some piece of our security system. This is what we are looking for with that CW. So, what benefits does it have? It has continuity because they are regular tests. There are improvement recommendations because we can always say, here and here there are differences and we have to improve. It is very important. And now we will see it graphically. There is an executive visibility and there is an optimization of the investment in security. Why? Because we are globally testing everything so that we can see the full frame of all our measures against those real attacks and not specific ones. So we are using quite well the investment we are making in this type of auditory, in this type of control. And also, as we have a common frame, it will be quite visual. Quick example, just a couple of data if you see the graphs. So, our SCV in which a company, as we put it there, with a CM leader, with a market EDR, with a department and a series of years that has been setting up its system, many times. Also in this case, I have a shock. It is a bit closed. I don't really know what visibility I have, how effective it is. Well, we apply SCV and when the service starts and after a first queue, we get a data. You have, or the SCV shows you a 57.5% coverage. That is, you have a good coverage. It will never be perfect. A 57.5% of good coverage among the most critical techniques. And after several iterations of testing all the TTPs and obviously passing the recommendations so that they can adjust it, they quickly passed, in a global way, a 71% coverage. Then you have to keep working because there are things that were not covered, etc. How does this look? Well, easy. This is very well thought out for an executive report. That is, when you ask if you are CISO or someone from security and they ask you from the addition, but how are we doing well? How are we covered? What they want to see are things like this. That is, don't go and say, well, there are some new techniques. They want to see something simple in which they can see how it evolves, in which it is being worked on and where we are doing well and where we are doing badly. This would be that first evaluation and a first iteration. And what else? Well, I go to meters matri and the traffic light. The traffic light executive level. That is, it is useful for the technicians to make a quick map. But it is also very easy to explain upwards. So, with meter already colored, which this could be. For example, that first iteration. Where are we doing well and where are we doing badly? Here we are more yellow, more orange, more green. We can graduate it with infinite shades of color. But we have those three colors because the traffic light concept works. So, how is that evolution measured? So, that is, you have a QX and for example you have a 29%. You have a QI. 3 Qs later I am already at a 61. This is easy. It is visual and it is also designed so that it is represented like this. If we look at the detail, it is a little pixelated, but you can see how some yellows will go to oranges. Some yellows will go to greens. Some reds will go directly to yellows or greens, etc. Not always to think of something perfect. I apply this and after a couple of years I have it all green. It will be that no. Why? Let's see. The bad guys also think. They run. They evolve. They generally go ahead of us. So no matter how well you have it advanced, they will always get new techniques. They will always get you new evolutions. That one day you are in green and the next iteration in those same techniques more controls. More TTPs have been put in and you go to yellow again. But the good thing is that you know where you are at each time, where your problems are, etc. Finally, as a complement, SCV complements all those previous controls that we have said, and the question is if all these controls that I am applying really work. Conclusions. So very fast, validated in a recurrent way. This is important. That is, you can choose a newspaper. You can say every week. It is a bit too much. Because you take into account that you do an iteration of a lot of techniques. You have to analyze the results. See how it integrates with the different solutions and what we have, and in a report we say, hey, this is like this. 57%. This is detected. This is not. This is covered. This is mitigated, etc. But it is recurrent. The normal thing is that every month. Every 3 months you go doing that recurrence. Identify specific gaps. Things that we thought we had covered and that no. There is nothing there to stop this type of technique. Yes, because the EDR. But let's see. A strategy that is to create a new user, and if this group allows it, then that technique can be done. So if I can add a user to the system, it has nothing to do with the EDR or anything. If you have no identity, then you have nothing. And then you have a gap, and that looks pretty good. It provides continuous metrics, with which you have a lot of data, high level and lower level, of everything that has been detected and what has not. It is appropriate. So I would say that it is the most appropriate for an executive report, to carry things of this style and also optimizes the investment. Therefore, a bit like a final schedule, right? The question is no longer if you have controls, but if they are really working for you in the situations that matter. The real situations in the face of attacks that can cause a great problem in the company. And that is why for companies that already have a degree of maturity and are doing Pentias and they are doing Retum, etc., this is the evolution. This is the final step of maturity. I think it is coming here. Very well. This has been all. Thank you very much for your attention. There is a little bit left for questions. So if you have any questions, any comment, please send them. I can't hear myself now. Any questions? Yes. Well, half height. Where do I go? Here. Hello. Good morning. Thank you very much for the talk. I have 2 questions. Excuse me. Considering that there are limited resources that you can control the TTPs and others, is it better to focus on covering the maximum procedures of a technique that you know that impacts you, or do you choose a set of techniques and have? Well, very good question. It depends a little. You have to be reasonable. If I say, I have limited resources, maybe I have the ability to use this type of technique, or they give me a chance to do a little. An excuse to say it is important. We are offering it as a managed service because I think it is the most effective. The company is better to have the resources to implement these recommendations and reiterate to be able to follow it. But what you can do is focus on the attacker type and evaluate depending on the resources. If you do it autonomously, say, I can try a few. It gives me time to start. I don't know. I invent. To iterate 15 TTPs. We have a very large pool of 300. 300 and more. We are testing monthly about 100. That is, we are launching many things against the infrastructures that we are controlling. But one has to start depending on its resources, and you put those resources and you concentrate. Analyzing a little, what are the techniques that this attacker does? Maybe we will focus on those in which you have more chances to detect it. That is, maybe you don't detect some of them. But if this attacker systematically uses certain techniques that are commonly used by S and similar, it starts with those because the moment you detect them, you will have more problems there will be. Others that are not so developed. Others neither. And then there will be those that are perhaps finer, perhaps more elaborate. But if you are already paying attention to layers in which there are techniques that it always uses, it is a good point of detection to be able to neutralize it later. This is not something that guarantees the answer that will come later when that technique is detected. What this is telling you is that you have this. This is much more yellow, more red, more orange than you expected. But it is good to know what the reality is and from there see where I can be more effective, more optimal when implementing a recommendation of which you are going to do. Because the recommendation can be a new rule in the CM that controls this or modify the existing rule with this, and that's it. It is enough for it to catch it because you were not seeing anything, or you were not taking into account such things. It is a bit. If you have little resources, then idling there to be as optimal as possible. Thank you. Another question also. What do you know if you are familiar with the map of Meta? Taking into account the new threats of the IA. Do you consider that all these new threats are contemplated on the map, or perhaps there are still TTPs? Yes, yes. Surely more specific things will end up getting involved. But that's like everything. That is, the IA helps. It facilitates the attacker the possibility of doing many of the techniques that already exist. Faster, that is. In the end, I don't know. Attacks to get out of things more algorithmically. Things like frauds of the BEC, frauds of the CEO, where the IA can play a crucial role. For example, generate an audio from the CEO that calls you and tells you, I'm getting on a plane. You have 4 minutes. It will make this transfer. When it lands, I call you. Don't fail me. I trust you. Well, that kind of thing. Of course, there is the IA and all the attack and how it mounts the whole pack, so that it is credible, so that there are more and more things. But that is really in Meta. That is, in the end, maybe there will have to be more specific things. But when you are going to develop the tactics and techniques that exist in identity, that is, it is reliable. It is not reliable and zero behind. There in the sense of base it is. What happens is that it is true that Meta should incorporate or that it can incorporate some specific things. But as I mentioned, there is one more thing. Well, another round of applause for Abraham.